Richard the Lionheart is something of an infamous figure in history. As the King of England, he was away for most of his rule, whether it be to fight in the Crusades or in German prisons on his way back from Jerusalem. He's an important historical figure, both in terms of his contributions to the Crusades and for how his relatively absent reign would affect the future of the Angevin Empire. Let's be honest though, we all know him for that scene with Balian in Kingdom of Heaven, right guys? Anyway, I decided to play as Richard, who in 1178 is the Count of Poitou under his father Henry Curtmantle. I had the express goal of keeping Jerusalem safe from Saladin's wrath, and I decided to do so by picking up and leaving as a landless adventurer to reach Jerusalem and fight Saladin directly. What would happen along the way was certainly crazy, and the goals and ends of this run would evolve over time. I streamed this little playthrough on Twitch and on YouTube, so this video will have my face in the corner the whole time. If you're interested in the unedited livestream, check the description. Let's get into it. In order to achieve the goal of saving Jerusalem, we'll of course have to get a bit closer, and to be frank, Poitou is just too far west. Thankfully, as a Norman, Richard can just get up and go whenever he likes. Immediately, I became an adventurer and chose the swords for higher purpose while heading to Rome. I don't have the provisions to go straight to Jerusalem, so I'll have to go in bits and pieces. After a couple simple contracts, I continued the trip to Jerusalem. The nice thing about an adventurer without any men-at-arms is that traveling is very cheap. Unfortunately, the moment I arrived, Saladin was already invading Jerusalem. Right now, all I could do is donate war score to Saladin's side, so this isn't particularly good for my little goal. Rather than give up though, I did a few more contracts in the area and considered what I should do. I went to Cairo and started doing some contracts around there, and then went to Constantinople, and if it feels like all I'm doing is contracts, that's because in the early game as an adventurer, you don't have much choice. I can't really build up a reasonably strong enough army to defeat Saladin this early, so the hope is that Baldwin can hold off Saladin for a bit while I use favors from contracts to request men-at-arms. I was amazed to see that Baldwin had a positive war score. Maybe he didn't even need protection. I don't know what he was doing, but whatever it was, it seemed to be working. Anyway, I was slowly building up the camp and getting a little more powerful over time, and at one point, while delivering an icon to Khazaria, I came across Poitou, the son of wolves, a Catholic Norman feral boy on the steppes who I think was supposed to be Cuman or Khazar and Tengri, but you know, let's just imagine that this poor boy was abandoned here by some Norman adventurer. Anyway, after a bit of thinking, I did take him in, thinking he'd be a good knight once he grew up, even though all his stats are 0. It also reminded me to educate my other son, Miles, who will inherit claims to France through his mother one day. A little bit later, after I got back to the Byzantines, Poitou asked Richard to be his father, and this was definitely an interesting development. Poitou is older than Miles, so he'd become the new heir if I did this. Now, if this were offline, I might have said no and just pretended this never happened so as to keep the story on track, but when I'm streaming, chat tends to pull out some wild decisions from me. I adopted little Poitou, which in my head created the visual of Richard the Lionheart and his band of armored Normans, and then this little Turkish-looking, malnourished kid with the Plantagenet heraldry all over him. This visual will only improve over time, trust me. Anyway, I got some men-at-arms off the Greeks, resulting in some cataphracts, armored horsemen, and heavy infantry, which are honestly some very good results, considering I could have just gotten Akritai or something. I went to Cairo after and grabbed more men-at-arms, netting myself a group of horse archers and mubarizun, which, again, just an amazing outcome. We've got a combination of Turkish, Greek, and Arabic units, which are some of the best units in the game. Afterwards, I did a little tournament to get some prestige, and was continuing to be amazed at the existence of Jerusalem, despite Saladin's occupation of the city proper. Also, I didn't know, but learned during that stream, that Baldwin and Richard are actually from the same dynasty, albeit different houses. The Anjou dynasty, or some might say Angevin dynasty, is the origin of the Plantagenet house. Crazy. Unfortunately for my little challenge, Jerusalem finally fell in July of 1188, so I guess I failed, but I wasn't going to give up. Jerusalem can be redeemed at least. I returned to Constantinople to do more contracts, and then, well, I learned that although Richard can leave England, England can never leave him. The new King of England, Geoffrey, had a grudge against his gallivanting brother Richard. Somehow, Geoffrey had managed to get a team of Byzantine agents to assassinate the Lionheart himself, leaving command of the party to his legitimate heir and son, Poitou, the son of wolves. Poitou is, unfortunately, not a very skilled person, just in general. All he's really got are muscles, and that's about it. He's a 12-year-old with 23 prowess and 0 in all stats, but at least he's got his friend Miles to hang out with. The two get along well, since Miles always wanted a brother, and Poitou was happy just to have anyone to play with. While other children would perhaps find themselves on the streets begging for money, Poitou wasn't so easily returned to his feral past. Instead, he would stalk the streets of Mysia looking for rich Byzantines to rob. You might be wondering why the camp followers would possibly choose to continue working for Baitharson, and I'd like to think the sheer insanity of this Turk clad in Plantagenet armor and heraldry was enough to get them halfway to staying, but what kept them there was knowing he could absolutely destroy any of them in a duel. In the back alleys of Mysia, the 13-year-old Baitharson robbed passers-by and came back with a king's ransom and gold, although he didn't understand why the people were giving him money since he just wanted to give everyone a hug. He's a brave, ambitious, and just character. A just character wouldn't rob anyone, right? He just didn't realize that what he was doing was robbery, of course. I won't spend the entire video making jokes about Baitharson's imbecile trait, don't worry. He's honestly pretty badass, if we're being real, and he can still develop into quite the character despite his negative stats. In March of 1194, the Plantagenet adventurer grew up with a diplomacy education, giving him at least some stats. From here, I was conflicted about where to take the run. I could keep on building up my strength and fight off Saladin later, but I was also tempted to go for a revenge plot against Geoffrey and return to England. The opportunity to reclaim Jerusalem did arrive when the Pope declared a new crusade, but I didn't have high hopes that it would work out. Crusades in CK3 are always tough for the Christians, who love to starve to death before even arriving to the area, and who love to just not work together. I guess it's a lot like the real Crusades. Regardless, I tried and failed to reclaim Jerusalem via the Crusades. Although the hype for the Crusaders kept it alive for a while, it was dead on arrival in reality, and I instead spent time doing contracts across Greece, before eventually moving the camp into the mountains to do some poaching. This was when Baitharson, the son of wolves, came across the legendary White Wolf, and I mean, that was pretty fitting given his upbringing among wolves. To celebrate the mere sighting of the wolf, the camp held some revelries, but Baitharson was different since he saw the White Wolf. Near the end of the camp revelries, Baitharson suffered an epileptic seizure and awoke, seemingly normal. A few weeks later, while on a trip to make a delivery to Hungary though, Baitharson had another seizure, and this time when he awoke, he insisted that his name was Richard, but he couldn't quite say it the way his father did. He was mispronouncing it to sound more like Richard, and indeed when he tried to write his name down for the camp, he wrote it as Richard with an E. While much of the camp laughed it off, Baitharson, or rather Richard, seemed to be a new person. He was possessed, and some believed it was by the spirit of his adoptive father, Richard the Lionheart. This spirit was vengeful, and although it set out east to save Jerusalem, it would return west to avenge itself. Richard had a new mission, and it would require him to secure enough power and support to reclaim the throne of England. Together with his brother, Miles the Lion, the spirit of Richard the Lionheart in the body of Baitharson, the son of wolves, continued their work, as usual in western Greece, but failed to capture or kill the White Wolf, which was mostly because of the recent hunting modifier, reducing the success chance immensely. I could have been more patient and tried a bit later, but for some reason I felt the need to rush my goal. Looking back, Richard was very young and quite healthy, so there wasn't much of anything to fear, but I think I was worried the story would be lame if Richard died without redeeming his father's soul. Word of the rising Mongol Empire in the east was another push for Richard to head west, as the opportunity of the east was dwindling. Whatever purpose the party once had in defeating Saladin was long gone, as Saladin was long dead and Jerusalem unclaimed. Nonetheless, when Richard entered more epileptic seizures, he sometimes would sputter words that sounded kind of like Jerusalem, but it could have been a confirmation bias from the camp followers. The party arrived in Rome briefly and then traveled to Provence looking to reach London soon. There was fear that whoever ruled England at this time might not welcome the return of the long-lost Richard Lionheart, so the camp stopped by Paris first. It turns out that Geoffrey, the assassin of Richard, had died in his own tournament, leaving his son in charge. Although the assassin is gone, the kingdom is still rightfully Richard's, but he has no claim, as an adopted son of a man that died before he could inherit his father's claim. Thankfully, upon the death of Geoffrey, Richard's arrival in Paris had been known to the nobles of England, and those who did not like Geoffrey's line would promote Richard's return as a legend, equal in prestige to that of King Arthur. The way this works, by the way, is that as a family member of the previous legend owner, I can inherit the legend, and as a player, I can click inherit faster than Geoffrey's son, so that's how I yoink to this legend. The King Arthur legend gives a claim to England no matter what level you finish it at, so I don't have to even upgrade it to get myself a claim. It's perfect. With the backing of a legend, Richard arrived in London claiming to be the very Richard Lionheart who was supposedly killed in the east, but something was off. The nobles noticed Richard's distinctly Asian features, and some of the court who were old enough to remember the young man noticed the many physical differences between the two, in terms of hair, face, and body shape. Nonetheless, Richard insisted and showed his heraldry. Even his brother Miles followed through, saying that this was indeed Richard, his father. Richard hadn't told Miles to lie on his behalf, but Miles, being a more intelligent person, knew that it was probably best to encourage Richard's claim lest they be thrown out of the kingdom. Miles had inherited a claim to France from his mother Agnes, and if there was any hope of obtaining that land for himself, he'd have to get his brother on the English throne and leverage him for support in France. The two brothers could rule their kingdoms together and get along great. They could bring peace to Western Europe if they could pull it off. Richard wasn't necessarily thinking about all that high-minded stuff. Instead, he was acting on what the voice of his father told him. Some days, Baldwin was Richard, and spoke as if he were the Lionheart himself, and other days he acted on behalf of Richard, who he claimed was in his head. Only Richard could possibly understand what was going on, but he had the support of his more normal brother-son and camp followers. In an attempt to understand what was happening with Richard, Miles sent him to the University of Canterbury, where students and doctors would look at him. Richard, surrounded by intelligent people, took in quite a bit of knowledge from them, but the wisest doctors of the land had no explanation for his strange behavior, pointing to, perhaps, a demonic possession. So far, Richard had not done anything violent or evil, at least by the standards of the time, so an exorcism didn't seem necessary. If this is a demon, it's not a particularly evil one, and it sure is obsessed with Richard the Lionheart. Richard continued building his power and influence with more work, but in his downtime, he participated in grand tournaments across the land, as he was, quite frankly, a beast of a man. Ironically, in the grand tournament of Cardiff, though, Richard won the board games by surreptitiously eating a chess piece and somehow getting away with it, and then winning a singing competition afterwards. He used the howls he learned from his upbringing among wolves to create a powerful belting voice that amazed the judges. He then went on to lose the wrestling and dueling competitions somehow, perhaps because he could be easily outsmarted. Had Richard not been an imbecile, he'd actually have quite impressive stats by now. A diplomacy of 18 after the imbecile impact meant he'd have had 26 diplomacy otherwise, which is very impressive. Either way, the King Arthur legend ended in November of 1206, with Richard asserting his claim to England as the son of Henry Curtmantle. If that sounds confusing, it's because you have to remember that he is Richard, not Richard. Yeah, don't worry. It was around this time that he changed the camp purpose to a legitimate struggle, and he started balding. The lack of hair only served to make it even more obvious that he was of Eastern origin, but by this point, he had taken on the mantle of Richard Lionheart so well that no one questioned it anymore. Miles encouraged the party to head to Paris, where he believed the King of France might be interested in supporting a claimant to England for some favors. This had the dual purpose of allowing Miles to learn a bit more about his eventual kingdom, and to give Richard a real chance of becoming king. To show respect to the French king, the party did many jobs for him and his subjects, in the hopes that it might earn his sympathy. As well, I should add, this was my first time using the legitimist camp purpose, and I didn't really understand it. Basically, you ask someone for legitimist support, and if they say yes, you'll eventually get a contract where you negotiate out how much support that ruler will give you. That's how it's supposed to work, but that contract just didn't spawn for me. I assume it's because the King of France was, from this point on, quite busy, and often in wars, so he wasn't available to hand out that contract, and then later on, his capital moved to a new location that was very far from me, meaning I likely was too far for contracts to even spawn. The new location ended up being Jerusalem, actually. I'm not sure how it happened since I didn't see it, but France conquered Jerusalem somehow, and then made the kingdom there the primary title. The AI will almost always move its capital back to the de jure capital when it can, so the king moved his capital to Jerusalem. I believe this basically bugged up my legitimist support request. Nonetheless, we do not need France's support because I've got a different strategy in mind. If France's king can't help due to his business in Jerusalem, then Richard can always assemble his own army, but that'll take time and effort. Doing this via just contracts will take forever, but I was not yet aware of a very powerful landless strategy that I discovered on this stream. Looking to garner support, Richard traveled across the Holy Roman Empire, Denmark, France, England, and wherever else his skills could be useful, and through all his traveling became quite well known. When visiting the Holy Roman Empire, I got this event that gave me a claim to Castile, and I think it's because Sancho of Castile is my cousin. I was definitely surprised to see this, but happy to click it, and perhaps either diverge this story to Spain or just add Castile to the English kingdom later on. Regardless, most of this era of time is just doing contracts. It's not that contracts are super boring or anything, it's more that they don't translate well into storytelling. What can I say, Richard goes around solving problems and getting paid. After a trip to Copenhagen, Richard wrote his travelogue, which had misspellings everywhere, but was impressive nonetheless for its detailed reports of lands from Jerusalem to the steppes to England. Rather than publish the book though, Richard ate the book, consuming its knowledge to gain 5 perks. Very impressive work for a balding wolf child. Anyway, it was after returning to southern Germany that I uncovered my new strategy. You see, one of the diplomacy perks give you the option to ask for a request from someone even if they're not your patron, so long as your camp is in their domain. This is not at all limited to counts, dukes, or anything really. You can ask every single mayor for money, and it's not a small amount either. I don't know how this cash amount is determined, but I presume it's the income of the person you're asking from. So you can just travel from city to city and ask for money. It only costs you prestige, which you can get more of by winning tournaments. You can also just use the money you get from these requests to hold hunts and essentially create a mostly infinite loop. It's not truly infinite, but it can go a long way. Anyway, now that I've amassed 2,500 gold, it's time to recruit up a ton of men and assemble the death stack that will destroy England. It's kind of expensive, so I went to England to get even more money, and yeah, you can assemble massive amounts of money via this interaction. It's not really an exploit as it's working as intended, but it's just a balance oversight. Anyway, I put my camp in Calais and then declared war on the infant king Walter while he was fighting a civil war, so Richard could return to his rightful throne. Before the war could even really begin, Walter was dethroned by Richard's cousin Edith, and then a plague spread across southern England which resulted in the disfigurement of Richard. If anything, this helped his claim since now people couldn't see his face and claimed that he didn't look anything like Richard the Lionheart, although that positive outcome was ruined when Richard put the mask away and instead wore a nose cover. He didn't like how the mask felt. After occupying Kent and Sussex and winning some key battles, the army moved to Northumbria, where the temporary English capital was, and once it fell, Edith was dethroned and Richard restored to his rightful place. Richard the Lionheart, at least in spirit, has returned to the throne, and with that, his soul has reached some level of peace. Richard himself still claims to be Richard, and by this point the power of imprisonment and execution backed his claim, so for all intents and purposes, Richard is Richard now. It's not exactly a small thing to go from the son of a wolf to the ruler of a rich kingdom. Baitharsun has by this point gone further than any random person on earth could ever hope for, but his ambitions were stoked by his brother Miles, who finally came by to ask about his claims to France. The French king was off in Jerusalem fighting the Muslims and protecting Jerusalem, and although the entire purpose of Richard's adventures was to protect Jerusalem, the purpose has since evolved. Jerusalem will be safe under the King of France. After all, he moved his capital over there. Before doing anything, Richard got himself and his brother Miles wives so they could establish themselves as real monarchs. To Richard went Sancha of Aragon, and to Miles went Anna of Denmark. Don't worry about the age gap, they're just betrothals. The boys had a feast in London to celebrate and prepare in case one of them might not make it out of the war alive, and then the war to take France began. It was pretty anticlimactic though, since the French army was indeed all the way in Jerusalem. Not a single army came to stop Richard's forces as they occupied the Seine Valley. After some occupations, King Louis of France gave up his throne to focus on his new role as Jerusalem's protector, and Miles became the King of France, legitimized by his French mother. The brothers have done it. They've both achieved their dreams, and now it's time to enjoy it. Speaking of dreams, Richard remembered that little daydream he had of ruling Castile while in the Holy Roman Empire, which of course gave him a completely legal claim to the kingdom there. At first, everything was going fine, but I wasn't paying attention and my army got stack wiped. Because of that, I called in Miles and my allies in Aragon to make this war happen anyway. The war was not going well despite the help, and Richard even caught consumption, which the physician did not help. Suddenly, death seemed to be on the horizon, and then, at the age of 50, in May of 1228, Richard passed away with no children, leaving his kingdom to his brother Miles. What an amazing outcome for the true son of Richard, as the realm was quite ready to move on from this strange era of English history. Miles, as king of both France and England alongside perhaps soon-to-be Castile, has inadvertently created a massive empire. Despite the positivity of Richard's death, Miles considered him a close friend and a true brother, and if not for him, he'd have nothing. So a proper funeral was held in Canterbury. Miles the Lion regrouped his army with the Danish and Aragonese armies and was slowly turning the war around while grieving his brother. The call for a crusade came around the same time, showing just how eventful the life of a king can be. The crusade was for Ruthenia of all places, against the Mongols, and having seen some of the horrors of the East, Miles believed this crusade was doomed. Nonetheless, he would pledge support to show solidarity. Despite the poor start to the Castilian War, things were turning around for Miles, and before long, Burgos was occupied, which would guarantee eventual victory. After one last fight in Nájera, the war was over, and Miles was crowned the King of Castile, France, and England. The crusade was on too, but Miles had no intention to send his men to their deaths. He instead considered that he'd like to become something greater than a king. He's deserving of an imperial title. He needed control over a little more land to make an empire, so he decided to conquer Brittany. After conquering Brittany, Miles crowned himself the Emperor of Francia after Charlemagne in a way, but he renamed the empire to reflect his distinctly Anglo-Norman version of this realm. This is the Angevin Empire, with the coat of arms of the Plantagenet dynasty. This empire was created under strange circumstances with the return of two brothers from the east, but thanks to their great accomplishments and skills which they acquired on the road, they forged a great empire. From here, outside of the story, I was basically done with the run. I've accomplished everything I really want to, but I had just a little more to do as a sort of epilogue for the run. Miles the Lion and his imperial ambitions rival the likes of the Byzantines, but there's something more majestic about their empire. The governors of Byzantium that Miles met in his time there had a strong loyalty to the emperor, and this new emperor wanted something just like that. For now though, the crusade ended up being on Miles' mind simply because it hadn't yet been lost. The Pope told Miles that if they could have the support of England, the Crusaders could have a chance, and so he sailed out. Using their Norman longships, the Angevin army landed in Kiev and occupied it in preparation for a Mongol counterattack. Despite the Mongols' martial ability, the Angevin troops were extremely battle-hardened from their wars in recent times and were composed of a mixed army of agile cavalry, heavy infantry, and rigid spears. The Mongols hadn't seen a Western army so well accustomed to the wars of the East and were slaughtered outside of Kiev. After a little more occupation and a few more battles, the Crusades ended in victory as Miles' cousin Joan became the Crusader Queen of Catholic Ruthenia. Using the money from the war chest and the immense prestige of defeating the Mongols, Miles declared a new administration, one which was based on the Byzantine bureaucracy. The Angevin Empire was rebuilt in the spirit of the Byzantines, but it would certainly take time to change every vassal over to this new system. Many lords in France were happy to accept this new administration, but in England, the feudal system had a stronger grip, and so most of England remained feudal. So, when it comes to founding a new administrative realm, I've learned from this experience that it is a very good idea to try and fix up the ducal borders before changing over, because I've got all these provinces that are just very disorganized and split weirdly, like Cornwall in the Loire Valley and Poitiers controlling Brittany. It's cursed. It's also a good idea to put your own family in charge of many provinces before going administrative to give your family a boost in influence. It is what it is, this campaign is wrapping up soon anyway. I love vassal directives, by the way. I put a governor in charge of Toledo and made him a frontier province, so he might expand throughout Iberia. I then gave him the order to promote his culture in that region, which in this case is Norman. Later on, Madrid will become Norman. Being able to direct vassals is just such an amazing addition to the game that makes it a lot more fun to do. To be clear, you can direct vassals even without administrative government. I just waited until now to do it because I forgot it was a thing. To celebrate this new empire, Miles held a feast in Paris, and from here, a time of great peace gripped the empire. It was time to conduct the census and manage taxes. It was time to establish a royal court and create a realm worth living in. Great scholars like Roger Bacon rose to prominence, and he would work to create more of a world with a better grasp of science. All these immense riches fattened up the coffers of the empire, with over 200 gold coming in each month, but ultimately, men like Miles are never meant for just peace and accumulation. Where the ambitious hearts of men still beat, the will to fight will remain, and although the tides of peace had washed to the shores of this empire, the tsunami of war was coming. It's a period of great peacetime, you know? What it's all about. Oh, okay. Yeah, I said it was a period of great peacetime, but actually I lied. It's not. It's actually conquering time. In case you're wondering what I was eating, it's homemade cheesy bread that I made with my partner the night before. It was delicious. With the realities of the conqueror trait, I decided to force submission on Jerusalem. Remember when the goal of this run was to save Jerusalem? Even though Jerusalem was by this point quite securely saved, it still felt appropriate to call back on that old goal. Jerusalem was very easily and quickly occupied at the cost of Miles catching typhus and spending the last of his days in horrible agony. Miles passed away soon after taking Jerusalem into his empire, leaving his new realm to his distant cousin Geoffrey, and from here, we more or less end the campaign. I continued on playing as Geoffrey for another half hour or so, but I was done with this campaign. I wanted to keep playing a little bit just to have something of an epilogue, but Geoffrey's biggest difference from Miles is that he's English instead of Norman. I vassalized Ireland and Wales, while my frontier vassal in Toledo did indeed expand into Granada and convert Madrid to Norman culture. Very cool stuff. In case you missed it, I made a review for this DLC and gave it a 10 out of 10. I love this DLC for all the great stories it makes, and this is just one example of what's possible. This playthrough, starting as Richard of Poitiers, was streamed live on Twitch and YouTube, and if you're interested in seeing more stuff like this, check out the streams, leave a like, and subscribe. Feel free to leave suggestions for fun runs in the comments, but if I'm being honest, I mostly just play my own ideas, so you know, it better be something really unique and cool for me to go for it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time. Have you noticed your road to power? Noticed a lot. It's a very open-ended question, which I do not have an easy answer.